With the Bible background before Maurice and Dori speak. We have 4 readings today, 4 juicy readings. The first will be from the book of Genesis, chapter 37, and they'll read these scriptures during their talk today. But a little bit about Genesis chapter 37. A couple chapters before this is the story of Dinah, and those of us who have read The Red Tent will recognize this story. Dinah is Leah's daughter, one of Jacob's wives. So Dinah is claimed by Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the region that this great family is in. He saw this young woman, he seized her, and lay with her by force. We all know what that means. But then he decided that she was fabulous and he wanted to marry her, make a, decent woman out of her or something. I'm sorry, I'll stop the comments. Jacob and his sons tell Shechem's father that if all the men in their city are circumcised, like Jacob and his family, then all will be well, all will be forgiven. And they agree. And as all the men of the city are recovering in pain, 2 of Jacob's sons slaughter all the men of the city. Yes, that's what they did. Jacob is upset because no one in the region will trust them now. Then there's a long list of lineages, and in the middle of all of these lineages, God renews her covenant with Jacob, and Jacob's name is turned to Israel. So then we find in chapter 37, Israel's favor for his young son Joseph is greater than any of his other sons. Joseph is the son of Rachel, his beloved wife that he meets. And the conspiracy of those brothers to rid themselves of this favored son. Because Israel loved him best, he gave Joseph a beautiful multicolored coat that caused jealousy among his other sons. Clearly, this family is filled with problems. As a result, Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery and told their father that he had been killed by an animal. The next reading is from Psalm 105. The Psalms are very interesting to me because they are actually song lyrics. And tradition says that they were all written by King David, which is probably not true. But it's a nice tradition to think that they came from royalty, and that it just means that they're very special and they were beloved and valued by the people who wrote them, and thought so highly of them that they put them in their holy book. It's like our hymnal being put into the Bible, and this would reflect our values and our concerns of the day and our music. There's a reading from the book of Matthew. Matthew comes out of a very early Christian community that was greatly concerned with their identity. They were justifying their theology to the educated Jewish community. And proving Jesus' divinity and his legitimacy is a prime concern in this gospel. And finally, they'll be using a piece of the Ucc Statement of Faith, written in 1957. It was a founding document of the United Church of Christ. And we've been exploring the Statement of Faith to help us feel grounded and to remember what it means to be a liberal progressive church and why that would matter in the world. Take it away.
Thank you. Good morning. We are honored to be here with you this morning and to share some of the things that have been on our hearts and mind. Recently, Dori and I have been thinking a lot about those things that we can and cannot control. Between a global health pandemic, a long overdue reckoning for racial and social justice, educational and economic crises that will continue to affect us for years, unexpected tragedies like the explosions in Beirut, and of course, our own personal day-to-day challenges, it can feel overwhelming. Even for those of us fortunate enough to have a strong faith practice, as well as those around us that provide guidance, strength, and inspiration, These are very challenging times. All this reminds me that the first time that I was introduced to the following statement, that man plans and God laughs, I could not have imagined living in days like these. Yet, here we are. In preparing this message, we reviewed suggested readings for today from the Revised Common Lectionary, as well as the next line of the Ucc Statement of Faith we are exploring as a congregation. We have done our best to weave together a few thoughts that seem connected to a few common themes. But before we begin, please join me in taking 3 deep breaths, in through your nose and out through your mouth, to center ourselves for the moments ahead. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Okay, so let's begin with the next line of the Ucc Statement of Faith and continue our journey in exploring this message. As JJ has shared with us, this was written in 1957 at the formation of the UCC. Last week, she shared with us that the Statement of Faith is more like a gift than a command, and is used by individuals to strengthen their relationship with God. Today we are reading the 5th line, and it is a doozy. It reminds us what a gift Jesus' brief but extraordinary life was for us all. Line 5 of the UCC Statement of Faith reads, "In Jesus Christ, the man of Nazareth, our crucified and risen Lord, God has come to us and shared our common lot, conquering sin and death and reconciling the whole creation to its creator." Okay, that's deep. And I have to say I'm going to go a bit off script here because I was trying to find ways to really connect to this. And so I did, and if you'll allow me to go a little bit sideways, you'll probably understand. So one of my favorite movies of all time is The Matrix. 21 years ago, the first chapter of the trilogy was released, and I still find a few nuggets that bake my noodle every time I watch it again. I recently realized that an exchange between 2 characters, Cypher and Neo, is closely connected to line 5. Okay, now hang with me on this. Having recently been freed from the construct of the Matrix, Neo is asked by Cypher in a quiet moment if he knows why he's been freed and has joined these freedom fighters. And when Neo answers, Cypher says this, "Jesus, what a mind job. So you're here to save the world. What do you say to something like that?" What do you say indeed? I wonder what Jesus did say deep down in his soul when he had his own reckoning as the Son of God. What was he destined to do? What a mind job. Jesus, like others, called out as the Son of God throughout the Bible, lived up to a very high, let's say the highest of standards. He not only did what was right, but he did it when it needed to be done, and ultimately was lost to his Father. I mentioned that there were others throughout the Bible that were also identified as the Son of God, who lived up to what might seem unreachable standards. and in some cases were also lost to their fathers. Joseph's story is similar in that manner. Please listen as Dori shares our first reading and what that passage stirred in her.
Our first reading, folks, is from Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 4 and 12 through 28. You will recognize, as JJ mentioned, the story of Joseph and his beautiful coat. But more importantly, it is the story of brothers and relationship and choices. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob, also known as Israel. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other children because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them," he answered. "Here I am," so he said to him. "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him to the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." The man said, "Oh, they have gone away. For I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that the wild animals have devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of this land and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Thus ends the reading. So I am one of 4 siblings, and I must say, this story spoke to me. How many of us are the Joseph in our family or have a Joseph in our lives? Someone who embodies all that we are not. It could be a sibling, it could be a friend. They are the well-liked people, the ones that others talk about in glowing terms. They are the ones that make us aware of qualities we do not see in ourselves. They arouse in us feelings of jealousy or worse. As it says in verse 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. I was the youngest sibling in my family, and I can so relate to Joseph. I was and still am working on not always being a pleaser, and I think it comes from sibling order. So there are things that I know that I did when I was young, about 17, Joseph's age, that probably did not endear me to my siblings. And we see Joseph do many of these things in his story. He is the one who is going to turn you in and let your parents know all the things that you should have not been doing. He is the reporter. Was it pride? Was it haughtiness? Was it youth? Was it being a 17-year-old with older siblings? Who knows? But I found this interesting because I thought about it, and I thought about how sometimes what we see in other people are things that really are about ourselves, that people serve as our mirrors. And I came across this as I was reading this, and I thought, how timely. Author Brianna Weiss posts and posits, when other people mirror our unconscious behaviors, they show us a part of ourselves we are sometimes not ready to see. Can you connect to that? I can. In this age of COVID, I have been transported back to my mother's death in my mid-30s. And my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer when I was in my 30s. I had 2 young children, a husband, and a mother who needed me. She needed me and chose me, literally said to me, "Will you be there to sit beside me?" And I was. I sat beside her during chemo. I went to every doctor's appointment, and I sat with her when she lay dying. These are things that I now see in my 50s as her last and final gift. And at the same time, I was dealing with my siblings. Remember, I said I was the youngest. I have 2 older brothers who were very distant during this period, literally and figuratively, as they lived some 500 miles away from where my mother and I resided. I spent so much time being angry with them and generated so much energy around asking the question, why aren't they here? Why aren't they here with their mother who holds them as being such precious beings in a time when she really wants them to be? And then I realized much later, they knew what they needed to do for themselves. At that point, I had no idea what to do for myself. And I was looking at them with serious envy for being able to hold a space for our mother who was dying and simultaneously live their lives. I was unable to operate in both worlds. Fast forward to today. So the last 4 weeks have been a real family journey for me. Because of COVID-19, my 89-year-old father has been inside and he had blood clots in his legs about 3 or 4 weeks ago. That turned into a hospital visit. Luckily, he tested negative for COVID-19 when he went into the hospital. The blood clots were treated, and he was sent home. He came home and immediately passed out and hit his head on the floor and became hospitalized once again. Now, the story to tell is that my brothers have been chosen by my father to be his caregiver. So our roles have been reversed. I am the distant one who is far away, and they are the ones that are right in the heat of it. And it was so interesting when this story came from the lectionary at this time. And I thought, what a gift. What a gift that I get to be the one who's distant. And I began to ask myself, what I disliked and saw in my brothers, are they disliking and seeing in me? And then I asked the next question, what can I do to support them as they support my father? So a journey in questions, and a journey in responsibility, and a journey in choice. So there's another story in here, the one that I don't relate to. I was never the oldest child. And I always had that role of the youngest. I was the Joseph, right? The pleaser. And I think about my oldest brother, and I think about Reuben. So Reuben was the oldest of Israel's sons. And as the other brothers really seethed in their hatred and dislike for Joseph, he was the one who stepped forward and said, "Spare him." Now, I wonder so deeply about what made Reuben do that. Earlier in Genesis, we find that Reuben has committed an act that is a huge mistake, that literally ruins his relationship with Israel. But get this, Israel's not going to tell him for 40 more years that it's a problem. And he loses even his inheritance by doing what he does, by making his choice. So there's something in me that wonders about that older sibling piece. What was it in Reuben that made him look at Joseph, someone who he did not prefer? As I often say, we don't have to like our family members, but we get to love them. So what love was in Reuben's heart that said to him, "Stop this. Killing our brother is not an option"? I wonder if Reuben maybe had a vision or dream of the future. Did he know that if he gave Joseph a chance, that Joseph would work hard, that Joseph would in fact mature and become a person who was so additive? So Maurice has already referred to movies. I'm going to do it again. Movies are a big thing in our family. Media is a big thing. I think of the Psalms as kind of the synopsis of great stories. So we're going to move on to Psalm 105, which tells us a little bit more about Joseph's experience. So in this psalm, it reads, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, call on his name. Make known his deeds among the peoples. Sing to him, praise to him, tell of all his wonderful works. Remember the wonderful works he has done, his miracles, and the judgments he uttered. Offspring of his servant Abram, children of Jacob, his chosen ones. When he summoned famine against the land and broke every staff of bread, he had sent a man ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. His feet were hurt with fetters, his neck was put in a collar of iron. Until what he had said came to pass, the word of the Lord kept testing him. The king sent and released him. the ruler of the peoples, set him free. He made him the Lord of his house and ruler of all his possessions, to instruct his officials at his pleasure and to teach his elders wisdom. Praise the Lord.
Thank you. So I'm going to bring us home. And with our final reading, linking us back to Jesus. And ultimately, how this all might to relate to where many of us are today. A reading from Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 33. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, where he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by the time the boat, battered by waves, was far from land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "Is it a ghost?" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So when I began today's message, I spoke about the concept of what we can and cannot control. Ultimately, Dori and I have decided to commit ourselves to making the choice of making different choices. You see, Jesus and Joseph and so many other sons and daughters of God have modeled the importance of not only doing what is right, but doing it when it needs to be done. Clearly, that's not easy, but it is necessary. And one of the hardest elements to overcome in doing that is the internal and the external distractions that constantly surround us. As you ponder that thought, think about Peter in the last reading. He calls out to Jesus to have him walk over to him on water. Jesus says, "Done, start walking." Peter actually takes steps on the water. But when he got distracted and lost his focus, and as Jesus said, his faith, on what he was commanded to do, Jesus saves him and hits him with the classic line, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" So, my people, our people, we have the chance every day to choose how we engage and what we engage in. The choices we make, not only of what we do, but how we choose to do it, will have lasting effects that we may never see, but can be life-changing for all. Amen.
And may it be so.